good morning and welcome everyone. This is the Vitiello Communications Group Best Practices Roundtable discussion. This webinar is a little bit different from others that you may have attended because it truly is a roundtable. The team has prepared some information to share with you around best practices for a safe workplace reentry. That's extremely important and it's on everyone's minds these days. So we're going to spend some time kind of giving you some foundational information about safe workplace reentry, and then we will do some polling questions. So do have your phone available because we're going to be doing the polling through our phones, and we'll explain that in just a minute. So welcome and thank you for being here. Just so you know, Seth is driving, so thank you, Seth, for advancing to the next slide. Before we dive into the topic of safe workplace reentry, I do want to acknowledge that many of us are struggling with tremendous loss as a result of the pandemic and the brutal racism and injustice that we've seen over the last few weeks. And I just want to say, we acknowledge that and we grieve with you. These are very, very difficult times, and leaders who care about communicating with their people and connecting with their people, we're with you. I just want to make you aware of another webinar, and everyone is welcome to join this one. It is being hosted by the Women of Color in Pharma. And the topic of this panel discussion is Ally is a Verb. And I'm going to be co-moderating this panel discussion with founder and president, Dr. Charlotte Jones Burton. And the purpose of this is to bring together Black and white women leaders to explore what we can do together to eradicate racism. So I invite you to join us. This is Sunday coming up on the 14th. You can find links to registration in our social media. We've been posting this as well as on the WOSIP website. So just to give a little background about the way Vitiello views the employee experience, we think of it holistically, and we see it as 5 main components of an employee's experience with their employer. That begins from being attracted into a company, recruited as top talent, then onboarding for a successful employee experience, developing that employee, and then retaining the employee and training that employee as a great ambassador for the organization. And of course, that helps to start the cycle all over again. So Vitiello Communications Group provides communication support to organizations around this entire experience. And we find that it's important for leaders and employees to connect in moments that matter. What we've seen with the start of the pandemic is that those moments that matter, which used to be thought of in the workplace as strictly professional, now have blurred the lines into the personal. I mean, the fact that we are all here assembled, most likely in our own homes, we're seeing into each other's personal lives. So that veneer of professionalism has been eradicated by the pandemic and the steps that we've had to take to work successfully and to continue working through. Seth, if you would just advance to the next slide. We know that communication best practices call for content to be delivered consistently across many channels. And the reason for that is because people absorb information, they act on it in different ways. Nadine recently wrote a blog, and it's posted to our website, about different learning styles. So all of your communication wants to take into account the fact that people are coming into your workforce from different generations with different preferences and learning styles. And so the communication that you share with them really needs to be around this entire continuum of the communication landscape. That's sort of the way we view the world, and that's the way we help our clients engage their employees in the employee experience. We find that doing this helps them build a culture that's strong and healthy and vibrant. Communication really is one of the best and actually most cost-effective ways to build a great culture. So one of the things we wanted to bring to your attention today is that there are a number of states and cities that are requiring companies to write and communicate formal re-entry plans. And we want to make sure that you're aware. We certainly know that in New York State and New York City, this is required for employers. And so we're working with a number of our clients to help them build communication around their re-entry plans. This is actually guidance from the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. You can see that whether it's required or not, we would certainly advocate that best practices call for telling employees what you're going to do for them in the workplace when they re-enter, and then what behaviors you expect of them when they return. So we've been talking a lot to a lot of folks around two things. What are the considerations around safe workplace re-entry? And it has been so overwhelming to keep track of all the new guidance, but it is important that we do that. So what Vitiello Communications has done is to think about these considerations in three main areas. And of course, the first and most important is people. So if you think about that, you should be considering, what do your people need to get back into the workplace successfully? And here you see a few of the considerations that you want to think about. As you go on to the next one, that's place, the actual workplace itself. Now, for some companies, like manufacturing or healthcare, employees have been going into the workplace and observing all of the social distancing and the personal protection that's necessary. But for people re-entering the office setting after having worked from home, you want to make sure that your office is prepared and that you're thinking through how you're going to make that workplace safe for people coming back. And now the third thing to consider is your process. And these are around guidelines about your COVID-19 specific policies, how or whether you'll fold them into your existing business as usual policies, and then how you'll bring folks back into the workplace. Will you stagger their work schedules? How will your personal time off policy or scheduling be affected by your return into the office? And then how will you guide folks in terms of client meetings and business travel? We present these in these three buckets just to help you think through how to begin communicating to employees. Then going on to that piece of it, we also think about safe workplace reentry communications in three stages. Of course, the first is before they enter the workplace. And what we're recommending as a best practice is that employers conduct a sentiment survey to help them understand how employees are feeling about reentering the workplace. Then draft policies and messaging around what you plan to do. Hold virtual meetings before they even get back into the workplace so that line managers have the information they need to answer questions. Conduct virtual town halls and post those reentry timelines and guidelines on your intranet. And then you want to make sure that CEO messaging is also on the intranet and sent via email so that employees see that communication. And then for the big day, create a welcome back kit and signage to help people as they navigate the new normal in your workplace. Now, the next phase is the during phase. This is entering the workplace for the first time. You'll want to post some welcome back messages and conduct a welcome meeting at the start of the day, socially distanced, of course. You'll review the new policies, and then you'll address employees' questions and concerns. And we're recommending that at the end of the first day back in the workplace, you hold an end of day meeting just to get a sense of how people did during the day and to address their concerns and to make adjustments to policies or the way that you're going to conduct yourselves in that workplace. You'll want to make sure that you're posting information and updates on your intranet so that if you are doing a staggered return to the workplace, all employees have access to the learning at the same time. And then, of course, you want to encourage your employees to use the internal social media channels that you provide so that they can share their experiences and be honest and candid, and you can use that as an opportunity for feedback and discussion. And then finally, the post phase, what happens in terms of communication once you've been in the workplace again. You're going to want to continue to monitor those changes to government guidelines and then update your own policies and information as those change. It's so important for the CEO to post a message of thanks to let employees know how important it is to have them return to the workplace. And then you want to publish some feature stories on your intranet about the successful behaviors that employees have used or the learnings that they've had, just to help them understand how they can be successful as they return to work. You might also want to host a virtual town hall to keep the conversation going, and then tie it up where you began by conducting an employee survey just to see how people are feeling and to see if you need to do anything to adjust your communication plan. So I know that some of this material may seem basic or very fundamental to many of you on the call, but that's okay. For some, this may be good information that they haven't seen before or haven't seen aggregated in this way. So that is the just basic foundational material that I wanted to share with you regarding safe workplace reentry. I do want you to know that we have on our website some resources about COVID-19 in the workplace, and also we have a reentry communication resource that's available for you, and that is on our website as well. But now we're going to do some polling and get the conversation a little more interactive. So here are the instructions for polling using the feature called Poll Everywhere. I'm going to ask you to take your phone and open to a new text message. Once you do that, you'll type into the to field the numbers 22333. And then in the message, you'll type JVITIELLO 368. That's in the text message, and then you'll send that text. Once you've done that, you will then receive a reply that you've joined Jill Vitiello's session, and you'll be ready to join in on the polling. So I'll give you a moment, and I'll also pause right now to see if anyone has a question about how to use their phone to participate in the polling. Okay, I'm going to say that's probably that we're all set and ready to go. So let's move on to our first question. What we want to do is get a sense of who's in the roundtable discussion today. So our first question is about you. How would you describe your role in your organization? Communications professional, HR professional, a business owner, a business leader, or other? Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm going to move on to the next question. Thank you, Seth. So here, we'd like to ask, when do you anticipate the majority of the people in your organization will return to the workplace? We've got a number of choices. You can only choose one. So choose the one that makes the most sense for your organization or what you're hearing. So very interesting. Most of you are polling that it will be July, August, September, or October, with the majority in the fall. I'm going to ask, is there anyone on the call who'd like to talk about how this timing was arrived at or what they think will go into making final decisions in their organization. I believe Seth said that you're able to unmute yourself. So if you can go ahead and do that, if you'd like to add something.
Jill, it's Nadine. I'll speak from the Vitiello perspective of how we're going to make that decision. First and foremost, it's going to depend on Governor Murphy's advice of when we can safely return. We do expect that based on his trajectory of how he's rolling out his plan, that will not be until, we believe, middle of August. So we believe that late August, early September would be the first time that we may be able to be in the office. Other thing saying also is we did do a survey for employee sentiment, and we'll take that under consideration as well. I don't know if anybody has any different views.
Good morning, this is Jane Keurig, recently retired, but working with a lot of nonprofits, and their biggest concern and what we're hearing, many of them rent space, and return will depend on their landlords and their landlord response to reentry.
Jane, thanks for raising that. We have found that is true in a number of cases, ours as well. We asked our landlord for a reentry plan, and when he didn't have one, we offered to help him write one. And his reentry plan was to post one sign on the front door. So people's responses to this vary. We advocate for a little more interactive and a little more helpful than just one little sign on the door. So, are the nonprofits, Jean, are they waiting for guidance from the landlord to say they may be admitted back into the offices that they rent?
Jill, I have to tell you, the nonprofits, you know, I participate in a weekly mastermind with the nonprofits through the Morris County Chamber. I am amazed at how the not-for-profits have turned around and responded. I think the landlords are going to lose some tenants, quite frankly, because they're working so well and online, virtually. So it should be really interesting. They're working really well. Their response to the needs in our community, many of you on the line, I'm sure you've seen it. So, you know, we're talking about online fundraisers. We're talking, you know, placing preschoolers in school. Now that depends on the schools opening in the fall, of course. So there's a lot, but they're just amazing, their response.
Thanks for telling us about the nonprofit world, Jane. Really appreciate it. I think what we're finding is that working in a virtual or remote setting is actually pretty productive. Let's go on to our next polling question, Seth. So we'd like to know, what is the most pressing communication challenge of workplace reentry? And again, you can only choose one. So is it receiving clear guidance from government officials, or understanding how our organization will comply with those guidelines, sorting through the ever-changing information to create a reentry process that we can communicate, answering employees' questions, getting correct information to various employee populations, or deciding on the amount and frequency of communications? Yeah. Honestly, when we see these answers come in, and we see so many in C, oh, some are coming in with D and E as well. It's sorting through this material and trying to figure out how to help employees understand what we're going to do as an organization and what we need them to do to be successful upon reentry. Anyone want to share anything that they're doing, a best practice that they're using to cope with that sorting through information? I'm not going to call on anyone, I promise. But I will offer at Vitiello Communications Group, we eat our own dog food. So we advise our clients that they must have a task force in a crisis. And so we built our own task force. And you see the members of that task force are on this webinar as well. The first thing that we did was take that responsibility for our organization. And this is what task forces in our client companies are doing as well. Sorting through what were the sources that we were going to use as our main sources of information, and then how we were going to communicate that to our employees. What would be the frequency and the mode of communication. So by having a task force assigned to that, other employees in the organization can stay on task and be productive because they know that a small core team is helping them and the organization stay on top of things. Anyone else want to add anything to that?
Sure. This is Howie Gerber.
Hi, Howie.
How are you?
Good.
So, just there seems to be obviously an overwhelming amount of information, and from all kinds of organizations. Just a few days ago, WHO, not as in the rock band, but the World Health Organization, basically said, forget about masks, not important.
Wow.
And then there was this, or social distancing, it was one of the two. Anyway, and then there was this like, what? For the past 3 months, we've been doing all of this? What? Are you crazy? And then just yesterday, they walked back the comment. Why? Who knows? Actually, who doesn't know? But I guess that's just a proxy for. There's just so much information, and people don't necessarily see or hear about the walkbacks, and they're working on perhaps misinformation. I mean, there already in the healthcare world anyway is so much mistrust. So, and then if you think of my employer, I'm going to stick it to the man, ostensibly, and then we have all this information, and people I think might be fearful of acting or living their lives on wrong information. How does an employer rebuild that trust, if you will? How do they know that their sources of information are correct and they're doing the right things? Yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. There's lots of different parts of that.
I think you're right. You raised something very important, is that you've got to stay on top of it because, as you put it, those walkbacks do occur. And so you can be operating under one set of information or truths and then find out, oh, wait a minute, that has changed. That's why a task force that's staying on top of that is so important. It's really helpful because you don't just have one person doing it, you have several.
And something that I've seen personally living in New York City, although I'm not there right now, but I still go back once a week. Theoretically, everybody's supposed to be wearing masks that are working. I've been taking pictures of employees, all kinds of employees, all walks of life, not wearing their masks. And so it's one thing to have a policy, but it's another thing to enforce the policy. And let's face it, those masks suck on a good day, particularly when it's 87 degrees out, right?
Right.
I mean, I have a hard time wearing it all the time wherever I am, and if I don't see people in a Home Depot, for example, I'll kind of take it off and walk, get 50 feet of, free breathing in before I turn the aisle and see another person. So, I mean, I don't know whether this, discussion is anything about, governance of these new policies, but it's one thing to have the policy, but it's another thing to govern the policy. And then what? What happens when employees are non-compliant?
Well, you start by communicating the policy and what the expectations are. But thanks for that observation. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Seth, let's move on to the next question. We're asking, which of these channels is your primary vehicle for re-entry communications? Is it video chats with senior leaders, webcasts, town hall meetings, supervisor-led video meetings, internal social media such as Yammer or Slack, intranet resources, or email from senior leaders? Now I know in this poll you can only select one. We did say what's the primary one, but I know most of you on the call are using a number of these, if not all of them. So interesting that we're seeing email and, oh, there it goes back, internal social media. I think that's a really interesting, healthy mix of information coming from senior leaders and then also encouraging interaction about that information among the employee population. Does anyone want to comment on why they chose the answer that they did, or have a question about a best practice?
Michael here, can you hear me?
Yes, Michael, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. I think we're using B, C, D, and E, and F, except A, maybe we're using all of them. And I think it's important to use a mix. You want people to get the attention in their inbox, but you also need them to go to a place where they can find more in-depth information, like an FAQ, and that's what you need your intranet for. And of course, you need to share stories like re-entry, and you will use your Yammer channel for that. So I think we see a mix of all of these. The town halls we organize are very well attended, good questions. But of course, it's a challenge when you are, as we are, a global organization where every country has different rules and regulations regarding returning to the office.
Yes.
So it's very important that the senior leader in that country also is the one who communicate to the people in that country. And that has been one of our challenges, that some of the countries here in Europe, even neighboring countries, have different policies and different rules, but we must abide to them.
Michael, thanks for bringing that up, because you do work, your own organization is global, and you work with global organizations as well.
Yep.
But even with that scale, as you said, it comes down to local senior leadership being the one to be the spokesperson for what will happen in that region or that particular office. Thanks for noting that. I'm just looking at the time, and I want to be mindful of using your time effectively. So I'm going to move on to the second to last poll. Here we're turning a corner a bit, because in our task force, we've noticed that people are talking about reentry, and they're also talking about the corporate culture of the organization through the pandemic. So I'd like to get your sense of what communication strategies have been most successful in sustaining your corporate culture through the pandemic. It's interesting. So video chats with senior leadership, supervisor-led video meetings, and as you'll note, these are the same ones, the same choices from the previous one, and the internal social media. Thank you so much for voting. I want to just open this up and have you offer some best practices or thoughts about what you've seen in your own organization in terms of corporate culture, how communication has supported it, or what the challenges have been. Would anyone like to offer an opinion?
Jill, you mentioned the blurred line between personal and professional these days. I think that's been one of the things that I've seen working with my clients, is that there's been more personal sharing, whether it's like a happy hour chat or a coffee chat, or even on our internal social media, just sharing, you know, hey, here's my current work situation at my kitchen table with my 2 kids. I think there's just been a lot more of that, and having that connection during these times has definitely helped.
Thanks, Kristen. I'm glad you brought that up. Anyone else want to offer a viewpoint? Thanks. Let's go on to the next polling question. And this is, how has your corporate culture been affected by the pandemic? And that is, it's not been affected, it has strengthened, or it's weakened. That's interesting. this is fascinating, and thank you so much for your votes on this. I'd like to get your thinking, if you'd like to offer how you arrived at this opinion. Particularly people who voted that the pandemic has strengthened their culture. In what way? Anyone like to offer?
Sure, this is Howie. You know, the expression misery loves company. So a lot of misery out there, a lot of unknowns, a lot of anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera. And it's strengthened the bond, I would say.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because we have been counseling senior leaders at Fortune 500 companies and mid-sized companies that are privately held. And I think we see leaders in all kinds of situations saying, yes, this has put a strain on our culture, but it has brought us together in new ways. The one thing that they express concern over is, are we always going to be apart? How can we drive our culture forward if we are no longer co-located together in offices working collaboratively? And so some leaders have expressed concern about that. Anyone want to voice an opinion about that?
Jill, can I add something to that?
Sure.
So I voted for B, strengthening our culture. So we are a global consultancy company with a lot of people traveling all the time. So when you go to an office, it's only half full because the rest of the half is on client location or traveling to some jungle or a mine or whatever, somewhere in the world. Now everyone is at home and everyone using the same tools, everyone dialing into the same meetings at the same time. So it has really strengthened our culture. And I think our leadership, especially our CEO, has been really good at sending out messages from her kitchen table. She herself is an Australian stranded in London without access to her family.
Wow.
So sometimes you see her straight out of her shower, her hair is still wet, and then she posts a video message to all of us. And it's been really good in bringing us all together.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, we've been double hit, not just by the coronavirus, but also by the oil and gas price. And that means a lot of our clients have stopped their work with us. So there's been a lot of efforts to gain new work from other clients. And we've been very fortunate that other clients can see opportunities in providing virtual work. So yes, it has really strengthened our culture, I believe.
Thank you, Michael. That really gives beautiful context and really good insight into what your company is doing. Thanks for the voting on this. I see we're past the time that we offered, but I do have one more slide to share with you. If you could move on to that one, Seth. For those of you who have the time to stay on the line with us, I just wanted to raise that when you registered for this roundtable discussion, some of you offered these as topics that you either wanted to offer a best practice on or you wanted information about. So as we wind up our time together, this is the opportunity for you to kind of unmute your line and say, hey, I'd like to have more discussion on any of these, or I have something to offer to this roundtable. Now is the time. Okay.
Jill, Michael, again, if you want some insights into re-entry outside the US, I'm happy to help provide
that would be very helpful. Sure.
Insight. Yep.
Michael, just as context, why don't you let everyone else on the roundtable know where you're calling in from? And,
sure.
Yeah.
I'm actually, for the first time in 3 months, I'm in the office today. I'm all alone, but I wanted to get down here to the office, which is about 45 minutes from my home, because I have a farewell drinks tonight with someone. I'm based in Amsterdam, work for a global organization. I am, as Jill, part of the global organization IBC that I do on my spare time, but our global organization that I work for is ERM, Environmental Resource Management, and we do sustainability digital projects, client employee engagement, change projects around the world. We are almost 6,000 employees in 40 countries, in 140 offices. So quite a big and very big footprint in North America, in Canada, and the US.
Thanks, Michael. You gave us some insight into reentry outside of the United States. You talked about the difficulty of, having countries with different rules and regulations. In terms of a communication approach, how are you managing to segment that communication to the different populations?
So what I voted before was about the senior leaders in each location being the one communicating to their regional or local teams, and then sustain that with messages on the intranet. So every intranet has a regional local page as well, where you can find the local information. So we have an overall COVID page for everyone that talks about the facts, that talks about the development of the pandemic. And then we have regional local pages that gives you more insights into what does it mean for me as an employee in my country. What does it mean if I am put on furlough, which a number of our colleagues unfortunately have been, and what does it mean from a safety and security perspective if I have to go back to the office. And that is about looking at the local rules and regulations. So in my country, the Netherlands, I have to wear a mask when traveling. So this is my mask that I travel with. But when I'm in the office, I don't know, we need to wear a mask. But we will start re-entry people into our offices end of June, and we're going to do it staggered. So that means no one will work every day, not even the managers. There will be a staggered approach to, and there'll be time slots when people can work in the office. And only people who have a need to work in the office, like people who have cramped space at home, don't have a desk at home, or who have children who are getting on their nerves, so to speak, will be allowed to go back to the office. We're still not, and that means me, we won't allow people who have long commutes if they have to go by public transport, because there is a small risk even when you wear your mask. So I'm here exceptionally today, but otherwise I will be working from home.
Thanks.
And by the way, no business travel. We foresee no business travel until October, November.
Thank you. Anyone else on the call want to talk about what reentry plans their organizations have already started to think through? Jane gave us a little bit of insight for the nonprofits that she's working with. Anyone else on the call want to offer?
Hey, Jill, it's Mike. I just wanted to add some insight from the outside, from an IT perspective. Where everyone knows I work for a large IT organization. They're based out of California, but we're a worldwide presence. We had a company-wide meeting yesterday. Our CEO Pat Gilsiner got on, and aside from talking about all the financials and whatnot, the message to us yesterday was there is no hurry to open up our offices in the U.S. We have multiple remote offices throughout the United States, and for the foreseeable future, they do not anticipate us going back into the corporate office in San Jose, nor any of our remote offices. To also include, they want to limit the customer meetings, and there is not going to be any corporate-wide sponsored activities.
Wow, thank you. Thanks for that perspective. I
Sure.
really appreciate that. Yeah, I think we're seeing a number of large organizations. In fact, a number of our client companies are large global organizations, and that's been the guidance from them. I know Kristen on our team is in charge of one of those big accounts. Kristen, do you want to share what, you don't have to say the name of the company, but what the guidance has been?
Yeah, it's changing, and to Howie's point earlier, I think one of the ways to just acknowledge is to acknowledge that with people. So the guidance is going to change. This is a new issue that they're dealing with, and a lot of unknowns with this virus. So one of the ways to just combat that or approach that with employees is just to acknowledge it, to say that guidance is going to change all the time, because it is. But the last thing I heard, at least for this particular group, they're going back in phases. So essential workers obviously are already there, many of them. There are, I think, 3 or 4 groups. And the group that I work with is in kind of that last group, office-based, you know, and they're waiting the longest there. And the last I heard is they are waiting for a vaccine before everybody really gets back in full swing.
Thanks. Anyone else want to just open up for talking about what the reentry plan is for your organization, or any questions you have about communicating reentry plans? I know a couple of the folks who registered did add these bullet points. I don't know if they're still on the call or if they had to drop off. But one of the interesting things was that second bullet, workplace graphics. One of the women who signed up for this roundtable discussion is in the business of creating that signage for organizations. And having her add that as a bullet point is just a really practical reminder that if you're going to ask employees to go in a certain traffic pattern, you're going to have to order those signs and make those traffic patterns in advance. And that takes some planning, and that's why it's so important to get your reentry plan ready now so that you can begin those communication tactics and strategies that you need to help employees feel comfortable when they re-enter the workplace. Another person who I know was on the call, and I don't know that if she is still on, talked about the importance of employee feedback systems. And in our discussions preparing for today's roundtable, one of our folks mentioned that that is a huge time-consuming activity, is to constantly field questions from employees that relate to reentry, but how important that mechanism is. So if there's anyone who wants to add something about a best practice on those employee feedback systems, of course, we use them in Zoom meetings. We have employee polling, and not only for our own agency, but for our client companies as well. And then sort of questions that are posted to an intranet and then answered by the experts within the organization. Any other best practices, Michael?
Yeah, so our companies have done 2 things that has, because of the pandemic. One is we start every meeting normally with a safety briefing. So a story about safety somewhere in our fields or with our clients, but the safety moments that we have in each meeting have changed to more about how do we feel and how are we looking after each other from a psychological perspective. Are we checking in with our teams? Are we making sure that everyone feels good? And they have actually offered support. So we have a hotline in every office that people can call. It's free, and they can offer any kind of help. If you just need someone to speak to, or if there's something going on in your home, if you have issues with abuse and other things, you can call this number. It's all anonymous. It won't be tracked in your HR record, but you will get help. And I think that has just been a fantastic offer from our company.
That's excellent, Michael. Thank you for raising that.
Yeah, wow, that's really impressive. That's great. Yeah, the focus on mental health is so important at this time,
Yes.
and that's great that you're being proactive about it, and you're connecting people with resources. Because
Exactly.
you're addressing both, letting people talk and connecting them. That's wonderful.
It goes back to the blurring of the lines. You know, we have seen through the pandemic that we're in each other's homes. And while that may have happened occasionally, now it's an everyday occurrence. And even our lives are no longer separated because children are not in school. So we have children and elder care and pets and work people, you know, tradespeople coming into our homes to do repairs. And it's all sort of happening, you know, in real time as we try to work. And that the fact that that has happened and blurred those lines between professional and personal really means that those moments that matter are great opportunities for people to connect with each other and to build that culture of caring and compassion. We are nearly out of time. I want to thank everyone for joining in our roundtable discussion, for contributing to the conversation around best practices. And I would just offer that if you have any questions or you'd like to follow up with me or anyone on the Vitiello team, here's how you can reach us. We encourage you to visit our website. We've got a ton of resources. We're refreshing them daily. So if we can be helpful to you at this time, please reach out to us. We're here for you.